Hey there. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to Bold TV. I'm Carrie Sheffield here with my guest host today, Amanda Marcotte from Salon.com. Amanda, how are you doing today?
I'm excited, ready to join you in co-hosting.
All right, let's get to it. Don't forget to like Bold TV on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and Snapchat, and check out the podcast version of our show on iTunes and SoundCloud.
Make sure to add your questions and comments during the show, and if you love the show, make sure to share it with your friends.
So let's get straight to our first guest for headlines. It's Armstrong Williams. He's back. He was with us on Tuesday for Bold Business, and he's here because he's a Renaissance man of many talents. He's a political commentator and entrepreneur. Armstrong, how are you doing today?
Better.
Better. Okay,
Yes.
good. Well, welcome back.
It's a pleasure, actually.
So let's jump into headlines. Today we begin with President Trump, who tweeted this morning that military solutions are now fully in place, locked and loaded, should Korea act unwisely. This tweet comes after his comments this week that if the North Koreans continue their nuclear threats against the United States, they will, quote, face fire and fury like the world has never seen.
Then yesterday, President Trump said maybe his statement wasn't tough enough when asked what would be tougher than fire and fury. Trump said, "You'll see." So Armstrong, what do you think about all this? Do you think this is all bluster? Do you think there is actual substance behind what he's doing? Or do you think this is just kind of in some ways giving Kim Jong-un more attention than he deserves?
You know, I'll coin a phrase from you guys. Bold is good, but you got to use it with lessons from history, common sense, restraint, and ask yourself, if we were to carry forth on your way of thinking, is it worth hundreds of thousands of people dying in South Korea and possibly Japan? Is it worth entering into a nuclear war? As crazy as Kim Jong-il is, we've learned from the past presidents in the White House that common sense, diplomatic solutions involving China, because we all know that North Korea is a guard dog for China. They control it. They use that to get whatever they want, and it's keep America distracted. And while, you know, there are many things that I respect about the president, you don't ever want anyone to think that you're trigger happy, that you can talk all this rhetoric and with what is at stake. I was glad to read that from his military that nothing is in place for any kind of military strike. And I know the president has said that we probably need to strike first, but I mean, I think cooler heads and calmer hands and wisdom is needed in this situation. And I think in a situation like this, the president needs lots of guidance. Because let me tell you something. Innocent children have no reason to die because heads of state can't seem to come to some kind of reasonable, rational solution to stop what we've seen from Nagasaki, Hiroshima throughout history. I mean, it's just devastating. And as much as you read these stories from the military about how the United States has disadvantage and what we could possibly do with our B-bombers and our air missiles, no one knows what war brings until you're actually in war. We can speculate all we want. I would say to the president, calm down. Step back.
Oh, I think a lot of people say that to him about his tweets too. And I've been to Hiroshima. I've walked around. You can see the bombed out city center, and it's just this gut-wrenching feeling to know what happened there. But at the same time, to have a regime like North Korea, which is, as you said, bankrolled by China. I mean, China gives more than 90% of the economic activity to the North Koreans. Why isn't China doing more? It seems like Trump has tried by doing sanctions on the Chinese banks. He's giving arms to the Taiwanese. I mean, do you think there's anything more that we could do to get China to the table?
There's nothing new under the sun. All we have to do is go back to history. This has always been the relationship. But you've got to bear in mind something very critical happened when we placed those sanctions against North Korea. China did not vote against it. To us, we should take that as a sign of progress and as a willingness that they are willing to see the dangers of something they created, and they're willing to work with us to come to a solution. Instead of looking for all the things that we don't give us encouragement, the fact that they did not abstain, go against what the United States was pushing for before the UN is progress for us.
It's worth remembering, I think, too, that if there is war with North Korea and for God, let's pray it doesn't get to this, we somehow bomb them, there will be millions of refugees leaving North Korea and probably going to China. And they don't want that.
And Iraq has taught us that lesson.
Yeah.
Yes, that's the lessons from Iraq. You can start them, getting out of them, and miscalculating is something that no one has no control over.
So, I mean, we've got General Mattis and General Kelly and a number of advisors around him who are being much more diplomatic. They want to be more diplomatic. But I think that a lot of Trump supporters say that the era of strategic patience wasn't working, that nuclear warheads have been progressing under this new regime at a faster pace because we were too patient and we were too hands-off.
There may come a time when the rhetoric that President is espousing may be necessary, but that time is not now. My attitude is this: from studying history, after you learn 20 years after the war and the conflict, there was always a solution. There was always a way that war could have been prevented. War is an industry. There are a lot of people who become rich and wealthy because of war at the expense of innocents who fight because they love their country. They love freedom. You don't want to exploit the best of America, to fight something that's not necessary. If there is no solution at the end of the day, then I think all of Americans will say yes, but history has taught us that there's always a solution if you look for one.
So, Armstrong, what is the solution? How do we prevent the North Koreans from doing a strike against Guam, or maybe something more regionally to the South Koreans or to the Filipinos or to the Japanese?
Harry, it hasn't happened before. It hasn't happened before. You don't need someone who as bold and as Kim Jong-il. You don't need another gangster. You just don't need that.
Yeah, I agree. I don't want another gangster.
That's not the solution. Because listen, while we may enjoy this rhetoric, what is at stake here? You got to ask yourself, are you willing to send your brother, your son? Are you willing to send them? Because it's not at that level. There is no strategic reason for us to launch a strike against North Korea at this point, especially with China and Japan and South Korea, who are there and who understands the situation better than we. Now, if China and Japan, this is the solution, and South Korea said we should use military action against them and we will join you, then we must consider that and take it seriously.
Sure. And
until that happens, no way.
Yeah, well, and General Mattis has said that it would be multilateral if there was some sort of action.
Yeah.
Armstrong, we're lucky to have you, but we're going to pivot to talk about your show before you have to go. Tell us more about your show, what's happening, and we know you just got back from Vegas for a very exclusive interview with Floyd Mayweather. Tell us about your show and what you're doing.
You know, the world is not just about politics and about conflict. There are things that other people enjoy that gives us that safe space. And sports is one of those things that gives us safe space. And I was really intrigued sitting down with Floyd Mayweather, and you see all the things about him, about money and flashy, and you see he's a real human being who really cares, does much to empower his communities, who really tries to make a difference. And also this fall, our shows are expanding from a half-hour format to a 1 hour format, starting September the 9th. And Dr. Carson will be our first in-studio guest launching this. But you know, a high-profile guest does not sustain the show. You've got to find things that resonate with people, everyday people, because you know we're not going to get into the mindset we're going to have a high-profile guest on every week. And so we'll continue to do those things that we're doing, the kinds of things that bold TV talks about, being bold, but yet being fair and honest about the issues. You want to guide people towards solutions, not towards conflict and divisiveness.
Amen. Thank you.
Yeah,
well, good luck and congratulations on your show. We'll be sure to tune in. Where can people watch it?
On all the Sinclair broadcast stations. I've been in partnership with Sinclair Broadcasting for a long time, and all the Howard Stirk stations that we own, and I also at ArmstrongWilliams.com. And again, I appreciate bold and what you guys do, because you got to be bold, but with common sense. And caring about people and not your own self-interest.
Yeah, you know, and I think that that's what's interesting is that some people think that to be bold, you've got to be blustery, you've got to be angry. But I think sometimes the boldest moments are moments that are moments of calm and moments of reconciliation.
Yes, and that's what this is about.
Yes. Oh, you get it, Armstrong.
Yes. Oh, we all get it someday.
Well, it's great to have you. Thanks so much, Armstrong.
Thank you for inviting me.
Wow. That was a great way to start the show.
Yes.
So, yeah, I mean, I think that he brought a lot of common sense, because I think that's what's missing in just basically our everyday rhetoric. I mean, I think that Trump is definitely channeling a lot of anger that people have about kind of the world order and how things have basically, you know, just unfolded in terms of feeling a sense of powerlessness. And I think that he's channeling that, but in a lot of ways, it's not a healthy channeling.
Well, there's certainly nothing that makes me feel more nervous than the fact that we have a president that flies off the handle, and then his people underneath him have to do this cleanup work. That we're literally in a situation where everyone, the way we feel safe is we go, we're going to treat the president like a stupid old screaming man in the corner that doesn't matter, and then we're going to look to the people that technically work for him to be common sense. That's alarming beyond just even North Korea.
Well, what do you think? Put your comments. And Rondalie Deschamps, our loyal viewer, thank you and good morning to you as well. So, Amanda, what else do we got on tap?
So now we're excited to welcome Representative Frank Pallone. He's a Democratic congressman from New Jersey's 6th District. Today he's here to discuss North Korea and net neutrality.
So welcome, Congressman. Great to have you.
Glad to be here.
So what's your take on the situation with North Korea? How scared should we be at this nuclear risk? And what should be the response here?
Well, I don't think we should be scared, and I think you're right in that I do get that. In fact, yesterday I had several people that came up to me, one at one of the drugstore I went to, and was like scared to death. I think that, we should understand that there's no reason to be fearful in that sense. My concern always, and I heard what you were saying before, is that we have in the case of President Trump someone who just wants to throw oil on the fire. In other words, rather than doing what the Secretary of State Tillerson seems to want to do, which is try to come up with some diplomatic solution and make it clear that we want to work this out diplomatically, the president just makes these fire and fury comments and says, well, maybe I didn't go far enough. And that's certainly not what's needed right now. And that's probably what's making people so fearful that he's not looking to come up with a diplomatic solution. So I think the best thing is if he could just tone it down and work with the Secretary of State to see if we could have some direct negotiations with North Korea, or work for the UN or some international organization.
Well, and it's one of those things that's kind of frustrating, I think, because I think most of us, left or right, a lot of people on the right even, grasp that having a hothead as president is not the best thing right now. But what can be done? I mean, it is true that Kim Jong-un is like a madman and he's got nuclear weapons. Like, what do we do about that?
Well, I mean, I do think that we have to kind of get away from this idea that he's a madman. I mean, a lot of people on the left think that Trump is a madman, I think that the bottom line is that people who are in charge of a country do react to rational behavior. Fact of the matter is, the UN passed these sanctions, which are going to, directly impact North Korea's economy. And I think, like any leader, he realizes he has to respond to his constituents to some extent. And so, I think whether it's, with China or it's with the UN, I think if the United States makes it quite clear, and it may not even be public, it may have to be done privately and we wouldn't even know, that, we're willing to work with North Korea. We're not a threat. I mean, Secretary Tillerson said we're not looking to change the regime, right? And then I think you can get a positive response. Now, it may be through back channels. It may not be something we're even aware of. But my only point is that we really need to try the diplomacy. And, look, the fact of the matter is that if you had a conflict, not even a nuclear conflict, God forbid, but even a conventional conflict, you're talking about thousands of people that would lose their lives and directly impact our allies like South Korea and Japan. So, we can't continue with this fire and fury or fire and brimstone. We just can't. It's not helpful.
With all due respect, I mean, haven't we tried strategic patience? And Bill Clinton gave away $4 billion that basically enriched the North Korean regime, and we basically got nothing in return as they continued their progression and the march toward nuclear armament. These diplomatic approaches really haven't been working. So why would we do more of the same? Isn't that the definition of insanity?
Well, I would disagree with you. I mean, and again, I'm not looking to relive all the history back to the 1950s, but I think that if you look at this regime, which is father, son, whatever, there have been times, they've always been interested in developing a nuclear weapon ever since the Korean War, but there certainly were times when that was halted or frozen because of diplomatic efforts, by Democrat or Republican presidents. And, one could argue that President Clinton's effort was thwarted essentially by President Bush, right? But I don't want to get into that.
Yeah.
I think, because that's not helpful. I do think, though, that the history is, sure, they want to develop a nuclear weapon. Sure, they want to take over all of Korea. But they have responded over the years to diplomatic efforts and, as you said, sometimes to economic pressure, either positive or negative. And so I do believe that that can be accomplished.
Well, and what about China, though? Because it certainly is China is the linchpin in terms of the economic
Right.
activity. What can we do to put more pressure on China to rein them in?
Well, remember, China was part of the sanctions in the UN. They could have stopped it if they wanted to, right? So, again, I think that, China is, I think, maybe even more afraid of North Korea than we are in some respects because they're right at the border. And I think they can play more of a role. Again, I don't know exactly what Trump or Tillerson have been doing with China. President Trump has expressed disappointment with China in not doing more. I don't know exactly what he can do to make China be a better ally to push North Korea. But certainly there are signs that they're willing to help because of the fact that they supported the sanctions.
Sure, we'll take that. Well, Congressman, let's pivot to talk to net neutrality. I know that's an area that you're passionate
Sure.
about. I want to get your thoughts because I know under President Obama there was the approach to expand net neutrality to treat the internet basically as a public utility, and Ajit Pai, the FCC chairman, wants to do away with that. Is there a way to get a middle ground so that we're not just vacillating back and forth depending on who's in the White House? Is there a way to say, hey, let's have, net neutrality, but do it in a way that wouldn't bring us back to Title II regulation to put us back in through this, very old scheme of regulatory thinking?
Well, see, what I would like to get away from is kind of what you're talking about, which is all this legality, I'll call it mumbo jumbo, right? The reality is people want an open and free internet. Regardless of how they did it, the FCC has issued a rule, which was, backed by the courts, that we should have an open and free internet. And my concern is that President Trump and the Republicans on the FCC are looking to repeal that and then say, okay, now that it's repealed, it's almost like the Affordable Care Act. We'll repeal the Affordable Care Act and then we'll see what we can do next. Well, that's not a good thing for consumers. If you want to make some changes, fine. You can work with Congress, you can work with the FCC, but you shouldn't start out by saying we're going to repeal the regulation that provides for an open and free internet, because the way Congress works and the way bureaucracy works, who knows if we'll ever get to put it back in place, or whether or not what replaces it will be anywhere near as a free and open internet that we have now. So, I reject this fact that we need to worry about Title II or the legal underpinnings of all this. It's all been through the courts, and the courts have said the FCC did what there was no problem with using Title II to have a free and open internet. And I'm willing to work.
I don't think the issue is a legal question of whether you're allowed to use Title II. It's a question of whether Title II is the best approach to keep the internet free and open. I think that's the question, and I think that
That's what the Republicans pose. But my point is they want to start out by repealing the rule that allows for a free and open internet. We worked very hard over the last few years to accomplish that. It is in place. It is legal, according to the courts. So if you want to work with me to make some changes, that's fine. But don't start out by repealing it and then there's nothing, because then that gets into all the problems. In other words, if you repeal the FCC rule, then the service providers can decide that they don't want bold on TV, or they could, make it harder for people to access bold, or harder for people to use the internet because they have to pay more to run faster if they want to find a job, or a small business that wants to reach out and get more customers. All the benefits of an open and free internet are there now, and they're very important for people looking for jobs, for small businesses looking for more customers, for those who, care about free speech, which obviously you all do, that, you not take certain things off because you don't like the conservative or left-wing content. And I'm just afraid that, that the FCC repeals this, which they seem hell-bent on doing, and then that's it. We never hear about it again. So that's my fear.
So my question is, kind of like a way to get around it, we know for a fact that consumer protections like net neutrality tend to poll well across the board, across this partisan lines. Do you see a long-term legislative solution to this problem?
Well, I think that I think there could be we could work on legislation, or we could even work with the FCC to make some changes. But that's not what I'm hearing now. I'm hearing we're going to repeal this, okay? And then we'll come up with a legislative solution. And the only legislative solution that's been put forward in my committee by the chairman and the Republicans is one that's fraught with all kinds of loopholes that I think would not provide for a free and open internet. So, I've been telling people, look, I think the deadline is coming up in the next few days where you can send comments to the FCC, and a lot of people have written in and said they don't want this repealed. People should express themselves and go online with the FCC and say how they feel one way or the other. But my own view is if we just repeal this, it's going to be a long time, if ever, before we see a free and open internet again.
If they do repeal it, is there any kind of litigation strategy to stop this from happening?
Well, I think that the courts have pretty much ruled that the FCC has the authority to do what it wants. And so I think it would be, if they did repeal it, I don't know how you would make a good argument in the courts that they didn't have the power to do that.
Well, Congressman, we should connect you. Are you familiar with the Lincoln Network out in?
Yeah.
Okay, we've been working with them. They're trying to come up with a middle ground where there's some, they are conservative, but they're trying to find a middle ground where there is an area where we can have something that is going to be sustainable no matter who's in the White House. So,
well, my only comment is, look, I hate to make the analogy with the Affordable Care Act, but I think there's a very good analogy. Don't repeal it, and work with us if you want to make improvements, okay? And I think the same thing is true here with the open and free internet. Don't repeal it. If you want to make improvements, we'll work with you.
well, Congressman, we want to bring in one of the another cause that you're working on, which is the regulation of cosmetics.
Sure.
So, as a consumer, and I think Amanda is as well, of cosmetics, why should we be worried about what's happening in our cosmetics?
Well, because there's more and more indications that imported product, imported cosmetics, imported ingredients are dangerous. And there's very little review. So the number of imports is growing. I think only 1% is actually inspected by the FDA. And of that they inspect, 15% there are problems with toxic materials and other things. So I think there's a growing problem that maybe didn't exist 5 or 10 years ago. And the FDA, a lot of people think the FDA has the authority over cosmetics, but they really don't. I mean, if they find something's bad, then they can take action. But because they don't have enough inspectors, particularly for imports, they never find most of the stuff that's bad. And so I would like to see legislation and we've actually drafted it, that would treat cosmetics in the same way we do food or drugs, and it's similar. That, in other words, all the companies that make them have to register, they have to pay a fee, and then that fee pays for inspections, particularly of the imports, which only 1% are inspected right now.
But is it actually, is there a quantifiable health problem that we're seeing an increase in? Because
oh yeah, I mean there is. I mean, if we were here 10 years ago, I would say it wasn't much of a problem, but I think it increasingly is, because more and more of the product now, both the ingredients or the final products, are imported, and we've had several cases over the last few years where we've written letters to the companies because people have said, that their product is harmful to them. The Win, I'm just thinking out loud now, Win hair products, they advertise late at night. We've had, people whose hair has fallen out, just as an example.
So when we say cosmetics, you're talking about more than just makeup, but like shampoo and soaps and everything.
Yes, and
it's a broad category.
Right, and I think people think that the FDA has authority over it, but they only have authority if they can prove that it's harmful, and that's very limited given the few inspections they have. And the imports are the big problem, not the stuff that's being produced here.
All right. Well, keep us posted on that, and I would love to see data. I'd love to see proof.
Well, I'll show you. I just got a letter within the last few months. I guess.
Anecdotal letters are good, but
No, this was from the FDA in response, where they said, look, we only inspect 1% of imports. Of those, 15% have problems. I can send you that.
Yeah, no, that'd be very
That's an
interesting.
alarming number,
I think a lot of
15.
people in our audience would be interested
Sure,
to know more
sure.
about that. And then, really quickly, tell us, what's the Lift America Act?
Well, the Lift America Act is basically my response to President Trump's statement during his campaign, which he still reiterates, but not much, of having a $1 trillion infrastructure bill. If you remember during the campaign, he said that that would create jobs, or probably do more to create jobs than anything he could possibly do. But we haven't seen any action on it at all. And so within our committee, we have jurisdiction over broadband, obviously telecommunications, internet, safe drinking water, brownfields, cleanup, toxic waste cleanup, hospital construction. I can't even remember everything now. So we put together a bill that's like 170 billion of that trillion, because most of it probably would be transportation, which we don't get involved with. And so we're saying we want to see, money, federal dollars spent on infrastructure to increase broadband, particularly in rural areas, to deal with safe drinking water, because a lot of the pipes have, fallen into disrepair. For more money for brownfields to clean up toxic waste sites. The list goes on.
And have you reached out to the White House with this?
Well, I mean, he still says, President Trump still says he wants to do this, but it seems like it's been postponed maybe till next year, which is not the best year because you're going to have an election. So he hasn't given up, but he doesn't seem to talk about it much. I keep telling the Republicans, if there's one thing that would create jobs that we could agree on, that the president has said he wants to do, this is
Right,
it.
but have you reached out to the White House? I mean, Trump Tower's just a few blocks from here. You can
Oh,
talk
no,
to
no.
these people.
We definitely have talked to, I haven't talked to the president personally, but we have definitely reached out to the White House and tell them that this is what we want to do, and we'd like this to be part of the package, sure.
So Hillary Clinton got kind of made fun of during the campaign when she suggested that broadband to rural areas was a major infrastructure issue. So I'm asking you, why is that? Why is that so important for economic growth?
Well, it's the same thing, in other words, that we talked about earlier in some respects with an open and free internet. In other words, what I find is when I talk to small business people, they are making money and able to operate and start their business because of use of the internet. Kids, in school are able to use the internet to educate themselves in better ways. People are able to find jobs. And if you're in areas that where you don't have access to the internet, then you don't have advantages like that. And today, as you know, that's a huge disadvantage. So we would like to see the infrastructure program that the president proposes to include some major broadband build out.
Sure. Well,
and I don't think he's opposed to that. The question is, is this, when is this going to happen?
Yeah. No, it is the Lincoln Network that I mentioned before, one of our partners at Bold. They're having an event specifically on this issue of the rural divide. 39% of rural communities don't have access to high-speed internet, unlike 4% of urban areas. So there is a vast digital divide. So maybe you can attend the event, and it's with Chairman Pai, so you guys can have a nice dialogue.
All right. Well, you give me more information on
We'll send it your way.
Okay.
Great. Well, thank you so much. It's been a pleasure to have you, Congressman.
Thank you. Glad to be here. Take
Great.
care.
Come back. Again, that was Congressman Frank Pallone from New Jersey's 6th District. Next on our show, we've got retired NYPD Lieutenant Joanne Naughton. She's a veteran police officer and speaker for the Law Enforcement Action Partnership. This partnership is known as LEAP, and it's a nonprofit group of police, prosecutors, judges, and other criminal justice professionals who use their expertise to advance public safety solutions. Welcome, Lieutenant.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here.
So, Lieutenant Naughton, thank you for joining us. Can you tell us some about the work that you're doing on the war on drugs?
The war on drugs is something that has been around for as long as you've been around. We've been fighting the war on drugs for generations. And obviously, it's not working. We believe that drugs need to be regulated, need to be legalized so that we can regulate them, so that we can get a handle on what's going on. With prohibition, kids are able to get anything they want. They can get heroin, they can get it in the schools, they can get marijuana, they can get cocaine, they can get anything they want. Once we regulate, once we legalize these substances, criminals will not be involved in the picture. Go back to prohibition of alcohol. We had horrible, awful violence in this country, from people who were selling alcohol to Americans who wanted alcohol. We ended prohibition not because lawmakers said, well, alcohol is not harming anybody, so we'll legalize it. That's not why they ended prohibition. They ended it because of the violence. When they ended prohibition and let alcohol be legal again, the violence, especially the violence in the cities, diminished.
And do you think, because it took an amendment to do that,
Yes.
do you think we're going to have to do that constitutionally? I mean, how else would this happen? First question. And then second question, I know a lot of people would say, well, this is a slippery slope. When you say war on drugs, are you saying legalize all drugs, just marijuana? I mean, where do you draw the line between the more hard substances?
With prohibition ended the way the prohibition on marijuana is ending. The states did it. The states stepped in, and the federal government followed. And it looks as if that's the way it's going to have to be, as far as drugs are concerned as well. Slippery slope. If prohibition worked, we wouldn't have kids ODing on heroin. We wouldn't have kids becoming addicted to heroin if prohibition worked. Somebody who's addicted to heroin or something like that has a health problem. And cops, prosecutors, courts are not in a position to deal with health problems. If they were, we wouldn't have the problem now. I mean, it's just so obvious that it's not working. What we have to do is what they've done in other countries. Switzerland makes heroin available for heroin addicts. Now everybody's falling off their chairs. They make it available for heroin addicts, not first-time heroin users, people who are addicted. They have a program where they can, by prescription, get the heroin. This way, they don't have to steal, they can have jobs, they can have homes, and the statistics show that after 3 years, they're done with heroin. That's what we see from Switzerland. Portugal has its own program.
But do you see a marked increase in the usage of it if it's legalized?
No.
Not heroin.
No, there isn't an increase. They don't see an increase. In fact, even in this country, we don't see an increase in young people using marijuana in the states where it's legal. It doesn't happen. I know that's what we think. Make it legal and it's going to be all over the place. It's all over the place now.
So your organization is law enforcement officers, retired and still working, that are against the prohibition of drugs, as well as other kind of law enforcement issues that are important right now. What do you think police officers have to offer to this discussion about repealing the prohibition of illegal drugs?
Well, police officers have been charged with fighting the war on drugs. And just the fact that I was involved, I worked undercover in narcotics many, many years ago. And just the fact that I see police officers are still doing the same thing shows me that it's not working. That's what a police officer can tell you. The officer can tell you that his father worked undercover in narcotics. Yeah. He's working undercover in narcotics, and his son may keep on if we still do this. Which comes down to it's not working. We've got to be more intelligent about this. We've got to be grown-ups about this and recognize that as far as marijuana is concerned, there are adults who want to use marijuana. They want to. It's a free country. I don't see why they shouldn't be able to.
What do you think? Put your comments, your questions here about the war on drugs. I want to ask you about a concept known as civil asset forfeiture, which is a big problem related to the war on drugs, where people's basically their property is confiscated without any sort of crime or charges brought in place in many cases, and a lot of times they're related to drug charges. Talk a little bit about that, because I know that there had been some movement prior to the Trump administration to repeal some of these practices, and now the Attorney General has said he wants to go back to this practice.
There are horror stories of people who have had their property taken without any kind of due process. And the search for drugs, the war on drugs, has been the impetus for stopping people. It also goes back to stop and frisk, which has been a big problem in cities, including New York City. Looking for drugs is the reason that people get stopped most of the time. Sometimes it's guns, but drugs can be hidden. Drugs are powder or leaves. Why we think we can keep this stuff out of the country is beyond me when we can't keep people out of the country. But police officers will stop people, will frisk them, will detain them, will stop them when they're in their cars. And if there's any reason, doesn't have to be probable cause at all. Much a lesser standard is used, and people's property is taken away from them because it's called civil. The government doesn't have to prove that they have a right to the property. The person who owns it has to prove that it's their property and that they ought to get it back. Well, they can't do that without hiring a lawyer. So it has become a nightmare for many people.
Well, thank you so much, Lieutenant Joanne Naughton of the NYPD. I really appreciate your thoughts on this.
And be sure that you can check out their website. It's lawenforcementactionpartnership.org.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. So now let's go to our panel discussion. We're discussing what it's like to run for public office as a woman. We're excited to have a bipartisan panel and hear from both Democratic and Republican candidates.
We'll be talking to the Sheroes of New York. The Sheroes are a bipartisan campaign of female candidates who are promoting a summer of collaboration leading up to the primary elections in New York City. Their goal is to get New Yorkers to register, meet their local Sheroes running for office, and vote. Republican mayoral candidate and former Bold guest Nicole Maliotakis has been one of our Sheroes, and she's been here on the show.
And joining us today from Sheroes, we have Republican Rebecca Harary and Democrat Vanessa Aronson. They are both running for City Council for District 4. Welcome, ladies.
Thank you.
Thank you
so much for
very
having us.
much.
Great to have you. So tell us, what drew you to public service?
Well, for me, I've always been drawn to helping people, and that's what it's about at the end of the day. When I was a very small child, I had some mobility issues and also the sudden death of my father when I was a child, but it was the community that came together to really help my family through those difficult times. And so from a very young age, I decided to dedicate my life to public service.
And for me, it's pretty much the idea of always wanting to help people help themselves. And so when I can put myself in a position to solve a problem, I like to do that. And I feel that with the experience that I have, I can do that now on a larger level for city level.
So I know it's a little bit almost cliche right now, especially after Hillary Clinton's historic run, but what's it like running as a woman, even in 2017? Do you feel like you're facing obstacles?
There are obstacles. In fact, I brought a few statistics with me. Women we take up about 50.8% of the population, but only 10% of us are governors, 20% of us are mayors, and 24.9% of us have seats in state legislatures. That's not really a very fair ratio, I would say. In city government, for New York City Council, there are 51 city council members altogether, of which only 13 are women, and 8 of them are leaving. So either they're term limited out or one of them is not running again. So we have a very real possibility of only having 5 women in city council next year. And that's, to me, something that, we need to do something about it.
Absolutely.
So why do you think there's such disproportionate numbers in this? Like, why are there not more women in office?
That's a good question. I think it's time. This year, I think we're seeing a lot of women running for office.
Well, and there's statistics that show that when women run for office, they do win at the same rates, if not more than men. But we really need more women to run for office. Statistics show that women need to be asked multiple times to run.
Yes.
So were you both asked to run, or what gave you the boldness to run?
Well, I was, at the time, when I was asked to run by the chairwoman of the Manhattan Republican Party, I was very busy. I had just kicked off a nonprofit for women. It's called Propel Network. It's an organization that helps women by helping them train for vocational skills. We pay to put them into vocational schools, and then we help them find jobs. It was a lifelong dream of mine. I was so excited. It was off and running, and all of a sudden I was asked to run for office. It was just really out of the blue. I wasn't expecting it, but I was so thrilled because I said, you know what, there really are real problems in New York City, and if I can be a part of that and try to help those, people in our city, I want to do it.
For me, I've had the opportunity to be a part of a number of initiatives to encourage women to run for office. So when I was earning my master's in public policy at the Harvard Kennedy School,
very
I
nice.
know, I think we have that in
Yes.
common. I was part of a program called From Harvard Square to the Oval Office that
yes,
trains
I remember.
women to run for office. I was also part of the National Women's Political Caucus training program just recently to run for office. And for me, most recently, I was a New York City public school teacher. And it was a group of teachers who came to me and said, we need more teachers in office, more educators, and they knew that I had this background in public policy. I worked in government for 10 years. I served the United States as a diplomat overseas in Southeast Asia and here in our district at the UN.
Well, we need you in North Korea right now.
I saw that. Today's show is very,
Yes.
very timely.
So is it as simple as more of us making a point of seeing awesome women and asking them to run?
That's what these organizations are making that point, because again, when women run, they make change, they get elected, and we're seeing all over the world, but also in the country, the impact that women can make because we work together, we coordinate, and I think we bring a different perspective. When you
Absolutely.
have 50% of the population not being represented at the decision-making table, you wouldn't make a decision about your life if you only had 50% of the information.
Right.
So it's really about getting more perspectives at the table so that we can find solutions, make good policies that will be for everyone.
The truth is it amplifies the gender parity. I believe that by women running for office, we become role models to future generations. I saw you had on the screen my two granddaughters were women power, they're girl power, and they've come out and campaigned with me even, and they're very proud of their grandmother. And I think that it's very important for women to run because we really do inspire more women to run and stand up for what's right. And so,
And your organization helps women run for office. Are you seeing a surge in interest from women? I've heard on the ground that there is some of that.
well, we were asked to be Shiros. We were invited to be part of the Shiros campaign. It's really a campaign that was kicked off by Sharon Nelson, who is the New York City president for the chapter of the
National
Women's Political Caucus. So they asked 11 of us. How many are we?
11 of us.
Yeah, we're 11 Shiros. And we are, some of us are incumbents, some of us are running for office, and all of us are in it to win it, and all of us are in it to help New York City.
Well, and so you guys are both running in the 4th District.
Yes.
How is that running against each other, but you're also working together?
You know what? I have to say, I have been pleasantly surprised by the experience. I think women really figured out how to get along anyway. We get along anyway. We get along despite the fact that we obviously are going to have our political differences. But, and I think that's what women will bring to the table as more and more women enter into the realm of politics, is we bring to the table an understanding that it doesn't matter really what party you are. It matters how to get to the common sense solutions, figure them out, and make them work.
I had a few friends who were a little bit shocked that I would want to be part of this bipartisan campaign. They know that I am quite a strong Democrat, and part of the reason that I was inspired to run was in reaction to the results of the 2016 election. But I think it's really important to note that when I am city council member, I will be representing people that won't always have the same ideas or beliefs or background as me. And I think that our elected officials need to be able to listen and respect all different viewpoints. I think you cannot be everything to everyone, but you have to respect everyone and you have to listen to all of the voices in your community.
Can't be closed-minded. That's I think for me, that's what leadership is all about. It's about team playing. You cannot be closed-minded. You have to stay open-minded. Look for new ideas, find new common sense solutions, and that's how you get it done.
So during the recent battle over the Affordable Care Act and the repeal of it in Congress, it was two Republican women that took the leadership on the Republican caucus to shut down the bill. Do you think, and a lot was made out of that, do you think that women bring a different perspective, as many people said in the aftermath of that?
Well, I mean, I do take issue with all men making decisions of, what a woman can do with her body. I do believe that women need to weigh in on those subjects as well. With regard to the two women that, inserted their vote, that was their decision, and I think they voted based on how they felt. For me, I can only speak for me, and I can say to you that I need to see all the information. I need to speak to all parties, and I personally would vote on a bill that would be the most beneficial to most people. That's how I would take it. That's how I would take care of it.
Well, and in terms of this election and our mayor, there are a lot of, here at Bold, we've had some issues with subway trains and some guests and people. The subways have been really awful. So, what's your platform? And that's one area I'm passionate about is transportation.
Absolutely.
What's your platform? What would you do differently to shake things up? And what can you do just as one member on the council out of 51 people?
I think this is a really important issue. I'm out in the community every morning, every afternoon, every evening talking to community members, to voters, and the transportation system is absolutely top of mind. New Yorkers deserve a reliable and an accessible and a safe public transportation system. And I think that something that we need to do is have our elected officials actually take ownership and accountability for this issue. It affects our economy, it affects our way of life, it affects time at home with your family, which is really absolutely important. So when I'm in city council, I will advocate for our residents in New York City, for also our visitors who use the subway systems. We provide the MTA billions of dollars from our city budget on top of the fares that we provide from riders every single day. And we need to ensure that that money is being spent in the MTA capital improvement plan to improve our public transit. And I think also the city can do a lot with our bus systems to ensure that that is picking up where the MTA might be leaving off.
And speaking as a mom, we have universal pre-K, but the problem is there's a shortage of seats, and so many mothers cannot place their kids in a school that lives within their district. So they have to commute and take their child far to put them in a classroom that's far away. So they have to commute to that school, leave their child there, then first go to work, and then try to get back by 3 o'clock to pick up their child to first bring them back home to where they live. And so for me, I'd like to say that right now I want to dispute the commute. I don't believe that our mayor is doing enough to find more pre-K seats for kids where they belong in their districts, and for that reason alone, we're losing kids in classrooms.
Speaking of the pre-K situation, I know that the mayor has suggested that we expand universal pre-K past the 4-year-olds and down to the 3-year-olds. How do you all feel about that?
Well, as an educator, I know that early intervention is absolutely key. There's so much research to show that giving children an equal opportunity from the start is what can improve our city for years and years to come. So I think it's a great initiative. I think that there are some kinks that need to be worked out, particularly in our district. As Rebecca mentioned, there are people who currently don't have access to neighborhood pre-K programs. So that's something, when we're looking at these policies, we need to be thinking both immediate term but also long term. So I think this is a great initiative for our long term, but we still need to work out some of the short term kinks.
Absolutely. Yes. Agreed.
Well, but we agree. Yeah. But what about the outcomes, though? Because I have looked at studies as far as the outcomes of universal pre-K, and the outcomes suggest that there's actually no differential in terms of academic prowess and academic ability from a child who has pre-K versus no pre-K. So why would we use public money for something when we're not getting, any value educationally?
Well, one
I would dispute those studies. I would 100%. Speaking as a mother, I can tell you that I would certainly like to read that study and see what it's all about. There is true evidence. I mean, let's talk, for example, I started a school for children with autism. And there is real evidence that the sooner you get in front of that child and work with them, especially if they're before the age of 3.5, when their brain becomes more hardwired, the faster and more easy it is for that child to catch up to his peers. So in early intervention, as Vanessa mentioned, is exceptionally important in children. And I would say that socially, emotionally, and academically for every child to be in a classroom, starting at age 3.5 would be wonderful.
I'm actually a product of some early intervention, especially as what Rebecca mentions for students with special needs. When I was a very small baby, I had no muscle tone from the waist down. So doctors told my parents that I would never be able to walk. But my mother was a nurse, and she knew that if we could get me into physical therapy as soon as possible, I started Easter seals as an infant. And because of that, I was very lucky and was able to develop to where I am today. So I think particularly when we're talking about students with special needs, identifying those early has shown great payoffs in the future and could save the city money in services in the long
Sure,
run.
no, I think special needs are just that, special cases, but I'm talking more broadly.
But that's how you identify. That's
And
how
you
you
also
identify.
have plenty of kids that do fit into the broad programs in public schools and early childhood schools, but they're lagging perhaps a little bit in speech, or or they need occupational therapy or special therapy. They don't need a full spectrum of help, but they need a little bit of help. And so the sooner you get that to them, the earlier they are, the more early intervention, the faster they just stay and they maintain and even excel with their typical peers. So it's important.
Well, we got to leave it right there. Thank you so much, ladies.
you.
These sheroes who are with us, they tucked their capes in before they walked in. They did. So
Just saying, I know Vanessa will too, teamharary.com.
www.vanessataronson.com.
Thank you so much, ladies.
Thank you all.
Thank you both, Rebecca Harary and Vanessa Aronson. Don't forget the primaries are September 12th if you're watching here in New York. So now we're going to move to our regular bookster segment. As usual, we have our good friend Sarah Hill, who is going to be with us. She's the co-founder of Bookster. And also, I'm excited that we have a philanthropist who's going to be joining us. Her name is Jean Shafiroff. She's going to discuss her book, Successful Philanthropy, How to Make a Life by What You Give. Now, Jean has raised millions of dollars for charities ranging from healthcare to animal rescue and education. She also works with celebrities, and I love this, she even hosted an event for Oscar-winning actor Colin Firth prior to his receiving his Hollywood Walk of Fame star for The King's Speech, one of my personal favorites. So, Jean, it's great to have you. Welcome.
And thank you for having me here.
Great to have you. So, you believe that philanthropy can be a way to bring people together who have been divided by politics. Tell us more about that.
No question. Today, there is a lot of discord at the moment, and I believe that unity has to take place. And how do we do that? Through philanthropy. And philanthropy is not just about writing a check. I believe in that, for sure. If you have the means, I believe you have an obligation to give. But for those that don't, it's about giving time and knowledge.
Great. And tell us about your book then, about what inspired you to start the book, or to write the book. And I know you've got an introduction by Georgina Bloomberg, the daughter of the former mayor of New York, who's one of my favorite mayors, who I wish was running again, but he can't.
Yes, well, I wrote the book to inspire and encourage people to get involved in the philanthropic process. And I think most people think, well, what do I have to offer? I don't have a lot of wealth, so what can I do? But they're wrong, because if you have knowledge, say you were a school teacher or you are a retired CEO, you do have a lot to offer. And if you have a little time, you can start by giving 1 or 2 hours a week, and then you can, or even a month, and then you can graduate and volunteer. Again, I believe that those that have an obligation to give. We're not put on this earth just to consume. And so I feel very fortunate. I'm not a billionaire, but I'm also not struggling. So I believe the reason why I wrote the book was God wanted me the higher-ups wanted me to do something to help encourage people to get involved in the process. There is so much need, and volunteerism in this country is down now, so we really need people. One other thing, a lot of people feel they have nothing to offer, that they're not smart enough, but everyone has enormous value, and so if someone says to me, well, I can't do anything, I say, of course you can, and you're needed.
So one of the focuses of your book is what you call generational giving, like involving the next generation and the younger generations into philanthropy. How do we do that?
I believe that children at a very young age must be taught to share and then to be kind. So moms out there and dads with your children, teach them to share their toys, to share what they have, and then to be kind to their friends and then to their teachers and to everyone. That's the beginning. From there, I believe that philanthropy needs to be taught in the schools starting at a very young age, and I think these classes should be required. And then philanthropy courses can continue on through the middle school years and then into high school and college. The idea being that for some people it's natural to give, but we in this country realize the need to give, and we need to teach that.
What would you recommend for somebody who hasn't done philanthropy before? How would they get involved?
Start with a charity in your neighborhood or in your community, and first do a little research on a charity, of course, and see what appeals to you. So I suggest, say your mom had breast cancer and she is coming along, but you want to do something to find a cure for breast cancer. You could do research into breast cancer charities that have offices or outlets in your neighborhood or in your community. But go on the internet, look them up first, make sure they're not overspending, and there are 3 charity websites that you can go on to analyze a charity, and they are GuideStar, Charity Navigator, and then the Better Business Bureau.
Okay. GuideStar, Charity Navigator, and the Better Business Bureau.
Yes. Also,
That's important because I know that there is waste, fraud, and abuse sometimes with charity where people, their heartstrings are pulled and they want to pull out their wallet, but then it goes to someone who they're not actually doing what they say they're doing. And so you use these sites to navigate that. Is there anything else you'd recommend in terms of weeding out the bad actors?
yes. Generally speaking, a charity should not have overhead of any more than 20% of what they bring in. So most people aren't going to look at a 990 form, which is the form that a charity has to submit to the United States government. But what you can do is go on their website, see if they have a P&L statement, a profit and loss statement on the website. Also read as many articles in serious publications as possible about that charity. Ask around, ask people that are involved, get to know the players. There's a lot you can do. And then watch TV shows, go on Facebook, look everywhere.
There's sort of 2 general categories of charities. There's these big national organizations that have long histories and a lot of money, and then there's often smaller grassroots charities. How do people decide between the 2 which one to give their time and money to?
I think you have to get involved with a charity that speaks to you and where you're comfortable. For example, if I gave the example of breast cancer, but say you're really interested in animals and you want to get your children involved, or maybe your children want to get you involved, you could start off by going to a local animal shelter and maybe volunteering there, and then maybe even adopting and rescuing a dog. Now, I don't believe anyone should ever walk into a pet shop and buy a dog or a cat, because we have millions of dogs and cats in this country that need to be adopted. And so just by starting that way with your little boy or girl, you start the journey of philanthropy.
Great. And as far as you've been able to raise so much money, and I know that you have your friends, your successful, circles that you run in. How do you find the courage to make the ask, to have them write that check? Because I would imagine for a lot of people, they would feel shy, they wouldn't feel bold. So how do you get that courage to make the ask?
First, you have to know who you're asking. For example, if someone just lost a job or they're going through a divorce, this may not be the time for them to want to write a check. It probably is not, and you shouldn't be asking. But you have to ask the right person for the right amount at the right time. And it's a little bit of an art, but always be polite, know who you're asking for, make sure you have the knowledge on that charity that you need to have, and always back up your ask with official paperwork. You don't want to go out there and ask someone and then say, I don't have a letter to substantiate this. No, you can't do that. I do have an MBA from Columbia, and that's been very helpful because I understand the necessity of the legalities of asking and how careful you have to be.
Great. Yeah, that's so helpful. And in terms of like outcomes and metrics, do you look for accountability when you're looking at the product, so to speak, for a charity? So the charity, you know, they're not producing widgets, they're not making a product necessarily. How do you look at accountability in terms of what this charity is doing? In addition, I mean, we mentioned a little bit, but actual results.
All charities have mission statements, and they're required to follow their mission statements. So you can ask and see in paper, well, what have they done? And if it looks like they're not doing anything, I would probably skip that charity and go on to the next. I will add that in the United States, most charities are really scrutinized. So most are good charities. However, it's always good to do your research and make sure you're working with one that you feel comfortable with. Remember, if you have to give.
Yes.
Giving is getting. It's beyond rewarding. I can't tell you how wonderful my life has been because of this journey. I'm now an empty nester. I have 2 daughters. One just started her own charity, Global Strays for Animals outside of the United States. The other daughter got me involved at an early age. We were baking brownies at school. Maybe, I think in my career I must have baked 2,000 brownies, maybe 3,000 for the
Wow.
bake sales.
Do you bring some with you?
I should have. I had a winning recipe. But we had a lot of fun. It was very much a bonding experience, families getting together. And I think when you give, you feel needed. And someone who feels needed feels like there's purpose to their life. And I certainly feel like there's a lot of purpose. And I want to try to do more, never less.
I love that. That's so great. There's a phrase I heard of everyday Oprahs, where everyone can be an Oprah and find, no matter where you're at. And I know the bookstore community has a lot of millennials and a lot of young people who don't necessarily have a lot of money.
Yeah.
But what you're saying is giving your time and your energy. I mean, that's an investment too. And that's I think philanthropy can be an intimidating word. It's a fancy word, but what you're saying is very accessible.
Yes, I believe anyone can be a philanthropist. The definition is the love of mankind. That's what philanthropy is all about. And regarding millennials, we really need the millennials involved. And they're so smart, this group of young people, and they have so much to offer. And I always suggest for young people, get involved with junior groups. Be with people your own age, and you never know, you might meet your next partner. If you're not in a relationship, it can be very social because you meet people with similar values, other people that want to help. I have met so many great friends through this journey, and same with young people. And do what you want to do. There are 1 million charities in the United States. That's what I've heard. And so that means you have a lot of choices, and never forget that. And so do something that you want to do and start slowly. Maybe you want to be a big brother or a big sister to a young person. There are so many great charities in New York, around the country. Right off the bat, I don't recommend starting your own charity. It's a tremendous amount of work. A lot of legal issues involved. You have to be very, very careful. You have to monitor expenses very carefully. So I would say start by getting involved with a group in your community where there are other young people, and just enjoy the journey.
That's great.
Thank you so much. We have Sarah Hill and Jean Shafiroff. Thank you for joining us.
And thank you for joining us here on Bold TV. Make sure to join us next week back here, Friday, 10 a.m. And as always, Bold Business, 9 a.m. with David Grasso and the crew. Thank you so much for tuning in. Make sure if you like the show to share it with your friends on your Facebook page and retweet that sucker. Thanks so much, guys. Take care.